Jenny? Where's Jenny? Jenny in here somewhere? Do we know if this is a bottle up here for Wes? Okay, good. Okay, this is Wes. This is your water. So it's not somebody else's water. You don't have to worry about cooties. Of course, where you travel, cooties is your life. So, all right. Well, we can leave the lights up because we are actually not going to have a worship set for this session. We'll have a worship set after lunch, but right now we're going to get rolling right into our next session. So here for our third session and round 2 of Wes Bentley. So please welcome Wes.
Well, guys, one of the things I'm going to share with you today is about hearing and knowing the voice of the Lord. I think it's imperative as believers that we learn to discern how God speaks to us and how He calls us. You know, I remember being in a church in Olympia, Washington many years ago, and a woman come up to me afterwards and she said, you know, Wes, when you talk about hearing the voice of the Lord, she says, you speak as though you hear the audible voice of the Lord. She goes, I've walked with the Lord for 18 years, and I do not know the voice of the Lord. And guys, that's a real problem because the Bible says, my sheep, they know my voice. And there are ways to discern it, and I'll get into that in a moment here. You know, when I went to Africa, I did not go there to be a soldier. I went there to be a pastor, to be a Bible teacher. My wife did the women and children's ministry, and I love watching Vicki when she ministers. You know, I mean, we went to Africa this summer and we took it's really her niece, but she considers it her daughter and their children, which she considers them her grandchildren. And she asked me to come and bring something home during the day. I was at the office, so I ran and picked it up and I brought it home. And when I got in there, she's having devotions with the kids. But she's so animated. It's like she's reading the Bible like it's an action-adventure novel. And she's in there, and King David, you know, and she's just going off. And I mean, with everything she's got in her, she's trying to impart Christ to these kids. And I just love that about her heart. It really blessed me when I saw it. And, you know, one of the things that I know, guys, is that my wife knows how to hear the voice of the Lord. But we hear it in different ways. In 2013... I was in Russia, and guys, I always went to Russia on December 26th because the biggest holiday of the year in Russia is not Christmas; it's New Year's. They actually give gifts on New Year's to the children, like we do Christmas. Christmas is really a time you go and you just stand in the church for hours to prove that you're a good Orthodox Christian. And they shut down the country from the 31st of December to the 10th of January. So it's a wonderful time to go over there and to do ministry. And I've always loved it at that time. And, you know, I'm a cold weather person. I hate really hot weather. Truthfully, this isn't so bad. It's hot here. But in Africa, it's hot and it's humid. And you literally sweat all the time. I mean, you know, somebody told me, you know, once that there was dry heat here, and I said, yeah, I noticed one of your ushers burst into flames, but at least it was dry, you know. So lucky to have that going on there. But, you know, I would go there, and I love the snow, and I love the weather, and about midnight one night she calls me, and she said, honey, they've surrounded the national headquarters. They're trying to kill the general. What was happening at that time, there was a coup in the nation of South Sudan. The vice president tried to take over the country. And he had surrounded the national headquarters, and they were firing upon the general because they knew that to take over the country, they had to kill him. If they didn't kill him, they would not be successful. And I said, Vicki, I have to deal with this right away. So I called two of my senior chaplains in the Capitol, and I said, listen, guys, they are trying to kill the general. If we lose the general, we will lose this nation. I said, you get every man you can, and you get down there, and you counterattack. Do not worry about your lives. If we lose him, we lose the nation. And our guys mounted up in two vehicles, and we literally drove down a road in a hell of gunfire. Tracer rounds were coming down the road at us, and a tracer round has a red glow that follows it. It helps you to direct your fire. They got down to the national headquarters. There were dead bodies on the ground, and there were two positions that they were firing from. We set up mortars. We sent two mortars into one and one into the other, and we silenced the enemy. And at 4 o'clock in the morning, I called back the general. I said, General, how are you doing? He goes, I'm here with the men that you sent, my brother. And guys, this general will probably be the next president of the Southern Sudan. If he becomes the president, he will most likely declare the southern Sudan to be a Christian nation. Okay. When General Mamul got married, he called me from America, and he asked me to come over and be his best man. My wife was the maid of honor. That does not happen. You bring in someone who's from another army or tribe to solidify your power base, but that's not the way that he did it. And when I led him to Christ, he's been a very, very strong believer. He's had a real heart for the Lord. The first time I met General Mamul was in the early days of being in Sudan. I met two of he was a commander at the time, and there was another commander by the name of Commander Kwal Mignon. Kwal Mignon was known to be the butcher of Sudan. You can actually look him up on the internet. It talks about him. And the soldiers there would even tell me, we're soldiers. Kwal is a murderer. He'll kill half the people of a village. You know, if he brings you in and he laughs at you, you're finished. He's going to kill you. He'll shoot you, and they'll take you out and feed you the hyenas. And when I first got there, General Mamul called me to his headquarters, and he asked me for weapons. And I said, General, I believe in the justice of your calls, but I'm a missionary. I'm not a mercenary. And, I'm here to share the gospel. And we talked for about 2 hours, and at the end of it, he said, Wes, there's a difference between you and me. He said, Jesus Christ has captured you. Jesus Christ has not yet captured me. And, guys, we brought over these little tape players with Pastor Chuck's tapes in it. You wind them up and you listen to them. And he started to go through the whole Bible. I had the same conversation with Commander Kwal Mignon. And Kwal was a very different situation. He was very serious. He was friendly to me, kind, but you could tell that he was a very dangerous man. And we also started to give him the tapes. We brought in the movie Countdown to Eternity by Chuck Smith, and we got a little generator and a little TV, and we hooked it up, and General Mamul watched that movie 39 times. And he was really taken by what the gospel said. I remember on the day of our graduation, we had prayed for cloud cover because the enemy would often come in and bomb us. And that day, it looked literally like it was going to storm all day. It looked like it was going to drop heavy rain, and we could literally hear the bombers going over, but they couldn't see us, so they didn't drop the bombs. And we had been sharing Christ with both of them. One of the things that led up to this, it really had a profound effect on these men, is I got malaria. And I could have easily gone to a Western hospital, but the Lord told me, I want you to stay in the country. Do not leave. And guys, it was a very rural hospital. I remember that my staff told me this. I have no way to account for it. I do not remember it. I was not conscious at the time, but they said they took my temperature twice, and it was 111 degrees. Now, guys, you're not supposed to survive that. I can't account for it. I didn't take it. I didn't see it, but they told me that that's what it was. And I remember that I would go in and out of consciousness, and I woke up one time and I saw General Mamul, and he smiled and came and held my hand. I remember waking up another time and seeing Kwal Mignon at the end of the bed, and I could tell he was worried, which kind of surprised me that he was worried about me. And I woke up once and saw the chaplains, and I remember them being worried. Biggie told me that General Mamul came 3 times, Kwal Mignon came 3 times, and the chaplains came 5 times, but I only ever remember seeing them once. I remember waking up once, and Vicky was there. We weren't married at the time. And I looked over, and there were 2 goats in the room. I go, Vicky, are there 2 goats in this room, or am I hallucinating, And she goes, no, there's actually 2 goats in the room. So kind of gives you the condition of my hospital there. But guys, there was a point that I could feel that I was dying. I literally could tell I was dying. There's a point when you get so ill, you start to feel yourself slipping away. And I remember praying at that time, and I said, Lord, I cannot go down much further and come back up. I don't think you're finished with me, but if you don't do something, I can't go down much further. And at that time, the Lord spoke 2 Corinthians chapter 11 to my heart. And this is where Paul the Apostle talked about the suffering that he went through in the first 11 years of his ministry. Now, when Paul started his public ministry, guys, what a lot of people don't know, when Paul became a believer, for the next 13 years, he disappears. We don't know much about his life during this time. The scripture is strangely silent. We know for a time he was in Arabia, but almost nothing about that. When he would start his public ministry, he only had 22 years of public ministry before he was killed for his faith. 11 years in, he writes the 2nd book of Corinthians, and he talks about the suffering that he went through in the first 11 years. And he says, 5 times I received from the Jews 40 lashes minus 1. 3 times I was beaten with a rod. Once I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. I spent a night and a day in the open sea. I've been constantly on the move. I've been in danger from Gentiles, in danger from Jews, in danger in the city, in danger in the country, in danger at sea, in danger from false brothers. I have labored and toiled and have often gone without food. I've been cold and naked, and besides all these other things, I face daily my pressure and my concern for all the churches. Who is weak and I do not feel weak? Who is led into sin and I do not inwardly burn? And Paul tells us that in the first 11 years of his ministry, that he's been beaten 9 times severely. The reason the Jews would give 40 lashes minus 1, meaning 39 lashes, is most men died at the 40th lash. Now, not everybody made it to the 39th, but as a general rule, at 39 you would survive, and at 40 you would die. They literally learned to beat a person within an inch of their life. And they used a whip called the cat nine tails. It had a rod with 9 to 12 pieces of leather that hung in it. Within the leather was bone, and there was shell, and there was metal. And when you would hit someone on the back, it would grab the flesh and pull it right out of your body. And, early historians said it was a massacre. And they said that people that often survived it went insane. They were never the same again. They survived the beating, they lived, but they were never normal again. Their brains were just broken by the torture of what they went through. And yet Paul says of this, I count my life worth nothing, if only I might finish the race which God has set before me. Now, guys, that is an extreme missionary, and Paul has always been my hero of the faith. People often say, Wes, who disciples you? In Calvary Chapel, people would always say it was Chuck Smith. Guys, Chuck Smith had an impact in my life. But truly the person that I felt like discipled me was the Apostle Paul. His writings have meant more to me than anything in my life, and I constantly read them because they're of a great encouragement to endure hardship for the sake of the kingdom. And I just love how Paul's heart is, He's a man that is absolutely sold out to Jesus Christ. His life is not defined by the world, but his life is defined by the things of the Lord Jesus Christ. And it's a great blessing to me. Well, on the day of our graduation, General Mamul came down and Commander Qual Mignon came down. We were all dressed in new uniforms, and I remember me and Michael came in. When Qual came in, we popped to attention and we saluted him because he was a commanding officer. And even though at that time I was considered a major in their military, he appreciated the respect. He really did. But up to the weeks before it started, when I got out of the hospital, I was in my safari tent. We lived in tents for 4 years. And I remember Qual Mignon came in and said, when I saw you, I thought you were going to die. And I said, Commander, if I die, I will go home to be with the Lord. But if you die, you will perish for all of eternity. And then I quoted him 2 Corinthians 11. I said, this is what the first century church had to go through to lead a world to Christ. I said, I've done nothing special for the kingdom, and this is the very least of my acceptable service. And he goes, I don't understand you. This isn't even your country, yet you're willing to die for it. I said, if I die, I will be with Christ. If you die, you perish. It's the love of God that compels me to reach you with the gospel. Well, the day of the graduation, guys, was a great day, and celebration. People were dancing and feasting, and at the end of it, General Mamul started to go back to his compound with about 14 of his soldiers. I said, General, let me give you a ride. So he hopped in my vehicle, and I drove him and his men back, and I was just going to drop him off, and the Lord goes, it's time. And I knew what the Lord was saying to me. And I got out of the vehicle, and I said, General, I need to talk to you about the most important decision you'll ever make in your life, and that is the decision of whether to receive or reject Jesus Christ. He said, Wes, when you first came here, I believe that there were many roads to God. He goes, I now know there's only one road to God, and that's through Jesus Christ. He goes, I want you to pray with me, and I want to surrender my life to Christ, and I want you to baptize me into Calvary Chapel. And in front of 40 of his officers and soldiers, he took my hand, and he surrendered his life to Christ. Guys, I was so excited. I got in my car, and I raced back to my compound, and when I got there, Qual Mignon was there. And we began a conversation, and in the conversation I said, Commander, if you die tonight, do you want to go to heaven? He goes, yes. I go, if you die tonight, do you want to be forgiven of your sins? He goes, yes. I said, are you ready to surrender your life to Jesus Christ? He goes, yes. And in front of 75 of his officers and soldiers, he became a child of the King. People talk about this, guys, and pastors would come up to me and they go, we can't believe this man changed. He was a murderer. He was a butcher. But now he's so gentle, he's so kind. And he's a leader in the government today. You know, guys, me being a soldier, and this is very important you understand, does not make me more of a spiritual person. Back in 1984, I went to Horizon School of Evangelism, Mike McIntosh's church. And I remember that one midweek service, Mike came out on the stage and he said, hey, one of the ladies did not show up for childcare. Can we get a volunteer? Well, I didn't plan to volunteer. There were hundreds of women in that room, but not one single woman raised their hand. They knew something I didn't. So, using a great lack of discernment, I raised my hand. I got the 4-year-olds. I would rather be back in Sudan being shot at than ever go through that experience again. You want to talk about a terrorist organization, you know. See, we all have different callings in our life. And guys, truthfully, from the time I was 6 years old, I knew that I was called to be a soldier. I knew it. I never wanted to be anything else in my life. And I joined the Marines when I was in the 10th grade. I lied about my age. I volunteered for combat duty in Vietnam. I was a pretty highly trained soldier. I was deployed to an amphibious raider battalion. I trained at the Navy SEAL base, the Army Ranger base. We had our own specialized training. I was a competitive shooter in the Marines. I would shoot battalion and division matches. And my coach actually said to me, Wes, you are so good with weapons, I think you could shoot the Olympics. Well, I didn't want to shoot the Olympics. I wanted to shoot other people, so I didn't have any interest in that. And when the war in Vietnam ended, we started to mount up. The war ended. They called us back. I decided to get out of the Marine Corps and go to Rhodesia and become a soldier of fortune. Fortunately, Christ would get a hold of my life, and it would change everything about me. And guys, the Lord uses many people in different ways, and this is what you need to understand. Rob Douglas worked for our ministry for 2 or 3 years in Africa. I consider him a son of the faith. His ministry is completely different, but he's bearing tremendous fruit. See, we have different personalities. I don't relate well to a lot of people. I relate extremely well to soldiers. And, you know, they have a joke in Africa. They say if the president comes in town, he's here to meet Wes, because somehow I seem to be standing in front of these guys. The Lord will put me there to minister to them. As believers, we need to know how to hear the voice of the Lord. And in 1 Kings chapter 19, we have the story of Elijah. And I'm going to read this to you guys, and we're going to kind of bring it up. Let me start. I think it's going to have to start back here, yeah. We'll go back to chapter 18. It says, after a long time in the 3rd year, the word of the Lord came to Elijah, go and present yourself to Ahab, and I will send rain on the land. So Elijah went to present himself to Ahab. Now the famine was severe in Samaria, and Ahab had summoned Obadiah, who was in charge of his palace. Obadiah was a devout believer in the Lord. While Jezebel was killing off all the prophets, Lord's prophets, Obadiah had taken 100 prophets and hidden them in 2 caves, 50 in each, and had supplied them with food and water. Ahab had said to Obadiah, go through the land to all the springs and valleys. Maybe we can find some grass to keep the horses and the mules alive, so we will not have to kill any of our animals. So they divided the land they worked to cover, Ahab going in one direction, Obadiah in another. As Obadiah was walking along, Elijah met him. Obadiah recognized him, bowed down to the ground, and said, is it really you, my lord, Elijah? Yes, Elijah. Excuse me. And Obadiah was walking and recognized, yes, he replied, go tell your master Elijah is here. What have I done wrong, asked Obadiah, that you are handing your servant over to Ahab to be put to death? As surely as the Lord your God lives, there is not a nation or kingdom where my master has not sent someone to look for you. And when every nation or kingdom claimed you were not there, he made them swear they could not find you. But now you tell me, go to my master and say, Elijah's here. I don't know where the Spirit of the Lord may carry you when I leave you. If I go and tell Ahab and he does not find you, he will kill me. Yet I, your servant, have worshipped the Lord since my youth. Haven't you heard, my Lord, what I did while Jezebel was killing the prophets of the Lord? I hid 100 of the Lord's prophets in 2 caves, 50 in each, and supplied them with food and water. And now you tell me to go to my master and say, Elijah's here. He will kill me. Elijah said, as the Lord Almighty lives, whom I serve, I will surely present myself to Ahab today. So Ahab went to meet, Obadiah went to meet Ahab, and he told him that Ahab told him, and Ahab went to Elijah. When he saw Elijah, he said to him, "Is that you, you troubler of Israel?" And Elijah said, "I have not made trouble for Israel." Elijah replied, "But you and your father's family, you have abandoned the Lord's commands, and you have followed the Baals. Now summon the people from all over Israel to meet me on Mount Carmel, and bring forth 150 prophets of Baal and 400 prophets of Asherah to eat at Jezebel's table." So Ahab sent word throughout all of Israel to assemble the prophets on the Mount Carmel. Elijah went before the people and said, "How long will you waver between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him, but if Baal is God, follow him." But the people said nothing. Then Elijah said to them, "I am the only one of the Lord's prophets left, but Baal has 450 prophets. Get 2 bulls for us. Let them choose one for themselves. Let them cut it into pieces and put it on the wood, but do not set fire to it. I will prepare the other bull and put it on the wood, but not set fire to it. Then you call on the name of your God, and I will call on the name of the Lord, the God who answers by fire. He is God." Then all the people said, "What you say is good." Elijah said to the prophets of Baal, "Choose one of the bulls and prepare it. First, since you are so many of you, call on the name of the Lord your God, but do not light the fire." So they took the bull given them, and they prepared it. Then they called on the name of Baal from morning till noon. "O Baal, answer us," they shouted. But there was no response. No one answered, and they danced around the altar they had made. At noon, Elijah began to taunt them. "Shout louder," he said. "Surely he is God. Perhaps he is in deep thought or busy or traveling. Maybe he is sleeping and must be awakened." So they shouted louder and slashed themselves with swords and spears, was their custom. In the Jewish Bible, it says that Elijah said, maybe he's off peeing in a bush, So, Elijah's mocking guys, but you need to realize what he's trying to do is make the people see the foolishness of what they're following. We need prophets in this nation today in our government, because our government has abandoned everything that's godly. And anything that is filthy or stupid, they embrace. There's no morality anymore. I mean, it's absolutely astounding to me, the foolishness of our governments today. Midday passed, and they continued their fanatic prophesying until the time for evening sacrifice, but there was no response. No one answered, no one paid attention. Then Elijah said to all the people, "Come here to me." They came to him, and he repaired the altar of the Lord, which was in ruins. Elijah took 12 stones, one from each of the tribes of Israel. Each of the tribes descended from Jacob, to whom the word of the Lord had coming. "Your name shall be Israel." With the stones he built the altar in the name of the Lord. He dug a trench around it, and large enough to hold 2 seahs of seed. He arranged the wood, cut the bull into pieces, and laid it on the wood. Then he said to them, "Fill 4 large jars with water, and pour it as an offering on the wood." "Do it again," he said, and they did it again. "Do it a third time," he ordered, and they did it a third time. The water ran down around the altar, even filled up the trench. At the time of sacrifice, the prophet Elijah stepped forward and prayed, "O Lord God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known today that you are God in Israel, and that I am your servant, and have done all these things as you commanded. Answer me, O Lord, answer me, so these people will know that you, O Lord, are God, and that you are turning their hearts back again." Then the fire of the Lord fell and burned up the sacrifice, the wood, the stones, and the soil. Also licked up the water into trenches. When all the people saw this, they fell prostrate and cried, "The Lord, he is God, the Lord, he is God." Then Elijah commanded them, "Seize the prophets of Baal, don't let anyone get away." They seized them, and Elijah had them brought down to the Kishron Valley and slaughtered. And Elijah said to Ahab, "Go eat and drink, for there is the sound of heavy rain." So Ahab went off to eat and drink. But Elijah climbed to the top of the Mount Carmel, bent down to the ground, and put his face between his knees. "Go and look towards the sea," he told his servant. And he went up and he looked. "There's nothing there," he said. 7 times Elijah said, "Go back." The 7th time the servant reported, "A cloud as small as a man's hand is rising from the sea." So Elijah said, "Go and tell Ahab, hitch up your chariots and go down before the rain stops you." Meanwhile, the sky grew black, and the clouds and the wind rose, and heavy rain came on Ahab as he rode off to Jezreel. The power of the Lord came upon Elijah, and tucking his cloak into his belt, he ran ahead of Ahab all the way to Jezreel. Now Ahab told Jezebel everything Elijah had done, and how he had killed all the prophets with the sword. So Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah to say, "May the God deal with me, ever be it so severely, if by this time tomorrow I do not make your life as like that as one of them." Elijah was afraid and ran for his life. When he came to Beersheba in Judah, he left his servant there while he himself went a day's journey into the desert. He came to a broom tree, sat under it, and prayed for the Lord that he might die. I've had enough, Lord, he said. Take my life. I'm no better than my ancestors. Then he lay down under a tree and fell asleep. All at once an angel touched him and said, Get up and eat. He looked around, and by his head was a cake of bread baked over hot coals and a jar of water. He ate and drank, and then he lay down again. The angel of the Lord came back a second time and touched him and said, Get up and eat, for the journey is too much for you. So he got up and ate and drank, strengthened by the food. He traveled 40 days and 40 nights until he reached Horeb, the mountain of God. There he went into a cave and he spent the night. Now, guys, I think the amazing thing about this story, Elijah just called fire from heaven and killed, and then was able to kill all the false prophets in the land. And then this mouse of a woman squeaks, squeak, squeak, squeak. And he's afraid of her. And he runs. He just had his greatest victory. Now, if I was in that position, I'd say, hey, come on down. I got another round of fire for you. I'm going to barbecue you. Get on down here. But again, Elijah runs. And guys, I've learned in ministry that we fight real well when we fight within how we know to fight. But the enemy has a way of bringing things that we don't know how to fight it. And let me give you an example. False accusations. Over the years of being in ministry, I've had many people say things about our organization that were false. The amazing thing about me, I've never met them. They've never been to our base. They've never seen anything we've done. And they come out with these elaborate lies that they tell the world. And at first, it troubled me because I didn't know what to do. How do you fight this? One of the things that I found is the more you say you're innocent, it seems like the more guilty you are. And what the Lord has taught me over the years is ignore it. Do the work of God and let the fruit speak for itself. Don McClure and I have become very good friends. But Don didn't used to like me. He thought I was some kind of crazy mercenary, and I get that a lot. But I remember that a number of years ago, we were speaking at a conference, and I said, Don, I don't know why you dislike me so much, but if I've done something wrong, tell me and I'll apologize. But I'm not sure what I've done wrong. He goes, Wes, no matter what I have thought of you, everybody that I talk to speaks well of the ministry. All the Calvary pastors speak well of it. So I invited him to come to Africa, and I remember when he got to the first castle that we built. It's a school for children. It holds 700 kids. He literally was there with his mouth open like this, and he was turning. He goes, I cannot believe that you built these things. Later, Don said to me, and he said this to me on multiple occasions, in 50 years of ministry, I have never seen so much fruit and so much potential for fruit. And guys, defending yourself is a waste of time. What's important is when you go through these trials is to seek the Lord and say, what am I to do? A lot of times the Lord will say, be still and know that I am God. That's all you do. Now, it says, and the word of the Lord came to Elijah. What are you doing here, Elijah? If God ever comes to you and says, what are you doing here? It's a great time to start repenting. But Elijah doesn't. He replied, I've been very zealous for the Lord God Almighty. The Israelites have rejected your covenant, broken down your altars, and put your prophets to death with the sword. I am the only one left, and now they're trying to kill me. The Lord said, go out and stand on the mountain in the presence of the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by. Then a great and powerful wind tore the mountain apart and shattered the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. After the wind, there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake came a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire came a still, small, quiet voice. I want to put this into perspective for you so you can understand. Guys, when I first went to the mission field, I came from one of the smallest Calvary chapels there was. When I got there was about 300 people, and it just kind of reduced week by week. It doesn't exist anymore. And I'd heard that when missionaries were sent out from Calvary Chapel, most pastors would support them $250 a month. And I was the most active guy in the church. People actually would call me pastor, though I wasn't a pastor. And so when I went out, they decided to support me for $25 a month. After 11 months on the field, they wrote me a letter and said, we can't support you anymore. And I remember that when I found out they were going to just support me $25 a month, I thought, wow, Lord, I got a 90% reduction before I got to the field. And it was really a walk of faith. I remember at the time I had an old Toyota Corolla car, and I think this car had a couple engines and a couple transmission and a couple clutches. And guys, I got down to the point that I only had 2 gears that worked in that car. I had second gear and fifth gear. And I did have reverse. And I would have to get in the car in the morning and rev my engine up, stick it in reverse, because you got to get the RPMs, and I would back out, and then I had to rev it to get it into second gear so it would move. I think people in my apartment thought, this guy's nuts. I mean, he thinks he's got a race car, and he's got this dumpy old Corolla, And I would rev it, and I'd rev it, and finally I'd slam it into second, and it would pop, and I'd start hopping and stuff, And I never could get the green light to get on the freeway. I always got caught. So, I'm doing the same thing, and people are honking at me. They're giving nice gestures and stuff like this. And so I finally get in second, and I'm revving up to about the time the engine's going to explode. And then I would shift it into fifth, and it would start to hop, and the car would begin to shake. And it was like the space shuttle coming back into orbit, And the good thing was I think I had $1,478 in my account. I knew I had enough to repair the clutch. I got on the phone one day, and I was talking with the missionary, and they were going through real financial trouble. And when I got off the phone, the Lord said, I want you to send them some money. I go, how much do you want me to send, Lord? He said, send them $1,400. I said, Lord, you have seen my car, haven't you? God said, send them $1,400. Well, I went down to Bank of America, and guys, I'm nervous because I've got about 2 more days on this engine before it's finished, or this clutch. And I went down there, and I got in line, and it came my turn, and I turned around and said, I'm not quite ready yet. Why don't you go ahead? And I think I probably let 7 or 8 people pass me. And finally, I was the only guy left. I had to go up to the counter, and I was praying. I said, Lord, I'm willing to give it, but please show me that this is your will. Well, I got up to the counter, and the person that was there before me had left a piece of paper on the counter, and on it was written $1,400. So I got a cashier's check, and I sent it out, because I knew if I wrote a personal check, it wouldn't be good by the time it got there. Went home, and I was praying, and I go, Lord, I don't know what to do. You do this. Well, that day, there was a man that's become very involved in our ministry over the years, but he called my director at the time, Jeff Thompson from Eastern European Outreach. He goes, Jeff, I've seen Wes's car. And he went out and bought me a new Ford Explorer and gave it to me. And guys, the very act of obedience will move the hand of God very powerfully on your behalf. We need to understand that if you're faithful in small things, God will give you greater things. When I went to the mission field, I honestly thought I would be poor the rest of my life. Jeff said to me, he goes, Wes, missionaries don't make a lot of money. And I said, Jeff, I do not consider success by how much money I will make. I consider success by how much my life counts for Christ. And guys, the first years were so enjoyable. I cannot even begin to explain to you what a wonderful time I had on the mission field. It was just me and one other brother and our Russian interpreter. I would be on trains for 2 and 3 days at a time, buses for 24 hours, and we'd be driving through blizzards, and I would just be sitting there looking out the window for hours and meditating on the Lord. It was just me and Jesus, and I was so content. I'd go into the prisons and share, and in the time I was there, over 60,000 boys and young women came forward to give their lives to Christ. It was wonderful for me. I never wanted to leave Russia. If the Lord would allow me to go back, I would go back. I've always had kind of a hope that at the end of my life, when it's time for me to turn over the organization, that I might be able to go back and spend a few years in my beloved Russia. I love it there. I have many daughters, many sons, and they're very special to me. Even one today, I got a missionary from one of our girls in Mexico that runs our operations, and wrote to say, love you and praying for you. Got one from Russia, love you and praying for you. I mean, they're my family. But that's what God did, and it was such a wonderful time of life for me. And I remember at the time that one of the reasons I knew that God was real, when you have a need and you tell nobody about it, And 500 times you pray because you got to pay your rent, or you got to buy food, or you got to buy a plane ticket. And 500 times God provides. Now, if you told people about it, then you'd say, well, might have been me. But when you tell no one and you seek the face of your God, then you know it's the Lord. I do believe that any missionary that goes out needs to write a newsletter and let people know. You know, we talk about George Mueller, and many people know George Mueller and have tried to model their life about George Mueller. Sell everything and just pray for stuff, and they go out there and they run out of money and they collapse. Well, one of the things that they don't know about George Mueller, and they don't write it in the books, and they should, George Mueller never did ask for money, but he put out a weekly newsletter telling people what he was doing. And that gave the people the ability to pray and know. Because if people don't know the need, how can they give? You know, people need to know what you're doing. You know, I share with people the ministry, but God touches their heart and he gives. I never dreamed that I would be a wealthy man. And then God started leading me to get involved in the stock market. And guys, I don't advise you to do that, because most of you will lose everything you have. But the Lord just gave me wisdom. And I remember that when Facebook IPO'd, it was $40 a share, and it went down to $20 a share. And I said, they have 1.2 billion users. This is only going to go up. So I bought 16,000 shares of it. 11 minutes later, I sold it and paid off our U.S. headquarters, which was a $6 million building. When Tesla came out, I had 20,000 shares. When it hit about $900 a share, I sold it. And I'm very careful about getting investing, and I always put a stop order. But I think that the Lord chose to give it because, you know, my wife says to me all the time, she goes, honey, sometimes I feel like you give away too much money. But I've noticed that every time you give it away, God gives it back. And see, guys, if you're a vessel which God can pour through you, he does pour through you. But if you hoard it, you won't get it. You know, I've heard about ministries where pastors have died and there's $300 million in the bank account. And it wasn't that there was a bad pastor, but I think what could have been done for the mission field? Had $100 million been sent to Russia, and guys, one of the things about Russia when we went there, there was a tremendous interest in the gospel. I went to one city one time, and we were doing a work in a prison, and about 5, 6, 7 little boys came up to me. They came up and they said, we hear you're doing a drama in the prison. I go, yes. They go, will you do it for us? I said, sure. But I'm going to the prison. I'll be back at 5 o'clock. Tell all your buddies and we'll do it for you when we get back. By the time we got back 3 or 4 hours later, there was over 2,000 adults that had gathered. And I think the oldest boy was somewhere between 9 and 11. That happened. We would go into theaters, they'd be completely packed. But the problem that we had, most of the guys that went over as pastors couldn't make it in America. They never had a good job. They didn't do well. And they'd say, well, I can't succeed in anything in America. I might as well be a Calvary Chapel pastor. And guys, bless their hearts that they want to serve. I had a guy come up to me once at a church, and he goes, I've been divorced 4 times. I've been in and out of jail. I have a hard time staying off drugs. I've been in out of rehab 5 or 6 times. He goes, it's time I surrender my life and become a missionary. I go, brother, I appreciate your heart, but your life has to be in order before you can become a missionary. Get your life in order and come see me. Well, of course, I've never seen him. And God uses prepared vessels. He prepares you and he uses you. Guys, I don't think I would function well anymore in peacetime unless I get old enough that I can handle it. I've been in war too many years of my life. I'm comfortable in war zones. I function well. I know what to do. When I'm in combat, I know exactly what to do. And because of that, God has done a great thing into it. In the book of Jeremiah, I want to turn to Jeremiah. Let me get there. In Jeremiah chapter 32, I believe it's 32. Yeah. In Jeremiah chapter 32, verse 6, it says, Jeremiah said, the word of the Lord came to me. Hanamel, son of Shallum, your uncle, is going to come and say to you, buy my field at Anath, because as nearest relative it is your right to duty to buy it. Then, just as the Lord had said, my cousin Hanamel came to me in the courtyard of the guard and said, buy my field at Anath in the territory of Benjamin. since it is your right to redeem it and possess it, buy it for yourself. I knew that this was the word of the Lord, so I bought the field. Now, guys, when you read this, it's apparent that Jeremiah did not hear an audible voice. It was an impression upon his heart. And that's often how God works. I remember that when I was working for the first organization before I started Far Reaching Ministry, it was called Safe Harbor. And I'd been in the field for months. And I was exhausted. And I wanted to go home. And I came home from the field, and I told my director, Gary Kuzunoki, I said, Gary, do not send me back to Sudan for at least a couple months. I need to rest. He said, okay. Very next day, he called me up and said, hey, can you come down to the office? I didn't want to go down to the office, but I felt like I should. So I went down to the office. And when I got there, Gary said, I need you to go back to South Sudan. I go, what? He goes, there's been a massive attack. The North has come down. There are thousands of people displaced. And there's over a village where there's over 5,000 people, and 9 to 12 people a day are dying of starvation. And, I said, when do you want me to go back? He goes, today. I said, Gary, I can't go back today, but I said, give me a day to think about it, And guys, I went home, and truthfully, I was discouraged. The next morning, I got up and I went into my kitchen. And guys, I'm never one of these guys who opens my Bible and goes like this. I've never been that guy. But I walked into my kitchen and I was praying, and I'd made a cup of coffee, and my Bible was open, but I wasn't looking at it. And I said, Lord, do you want me to go to your hungry and oppressed people? I said, you know how hot it is this time of year, and you know how tired I am. With that moment, I looked down at my Bible, and my eyes hit the scripture, and it says, and if you spend yourself on behalf of the hungry and satisfy the needs of the oppressed, then your light will rise in the darkness, and your night will become like the noonday. The Lord will guide you always, and he will satisfy your needs in a sun-scorched land, and he will strengthen your frame. Now, that's pretty clear. Right at that moment, somebody slid an envelope under my door. There was a young girl that used to come and interview me. She's still a friend today. She's a very beautiful young woman today. Her name was Amanda Sass. And when she was about 15 or 16, she would come to my office and interview me. Well, she slid an envelope under the door, and I went over there and I saw the envelope, and I reached down and I picked it up, and there was a bookmarker in it. I opened it, and on it was this 2 verses. I knew at the time I was supposed to go back. So I got my stuff in order, and I headed back to South Sudan. When I got there, I needed to find a guide. And guys, nobody wanted to be a guide because we would go up this road, and there were rebel attacks on it all the time. I mean, they were constantly hitting military convoys and killing people. Very, very dangerous road. And I was willing to pay 3 months' wages of what they would receive for 2 weeks' work, but nobody wanted it. The pastor that was with me, I told him the next day, I said, I'm going to leave. He goes, you can't leave, Wes. You don't have a guide. It's too dangerous. I said, brother, there's 9 to 12 people a day starving to death. If I don't leave, people are going to die. And he was really, I could tell he was troubled. Well, I was in my room, and probably about 9 or 10 o'clock that night, there was a knock on the door. And I was a little concerned because there had been someone murdered in that hotel about a month earlier. A woman was killed. So I went over and I got my knife and, opened the door, and I'm peeking out, and it was the pastor. And he brings me this young man, and he said he's willing to go to Sudan with you. And I said, do you know the way? He said, yes. I said, be here at 5 o'clock in the morning. If you're not here at 5 o'clock in the morning, I'm leaving without you. And guys, he actually showed up at 5 o'clock in the morning. I was surprised because Uganda's time is kind of like his Mexican time, mañana, we start church at 8. By 9, you start the service because that's when everybody arrives. Nobody keeps time. And I said to him, his name was Anthony. I said, Anthony, do you know the way? He goes, yes. When we left the hotel, 45 minutes later, we drove past the hotel again. I go, Anthony, do you know the way? He goes, I'm sorry, I made a mistake. It won't happen again. And he didn't. When we got to the road to go up to where we're going, the city of Ye, Anthony had been on that road before. And he told me that one night they were coming down a road. They had 3 buses. They were in a military convoy. And the first thing that happened was an RPG hit his bus. and it exploded and caught on fire, and there were people, body parts there, and bullets just began raining down upon them. And he said him and another guy jumped off the back of the bus, and they ran off into the bush, and they could hear the screaming, the people dying, and the gunfighting. And he said he ran up over a hill with another guy, and there was a full-grown male lion, and the lion got the other guy, and he ran off as you could hear the guy being torn apart and screaming. So when we hit that road, he started praying in tongues as loud as he could. For 45 straight minutes, he was in my car. And finally I said, Anthony, if you don't shut up, it won't be the rebels that kill you. I remember that we took some food with us. I bought a thing of peanut butter and bananas, and I remember the first time he put peanut butter in his mouth, he goes, brother, this is very good, you know. And he was actually a sweet kid. He had a real heart. Guys, we got up to a city called Poshquatch. We needed fuel, and there were no gas stations, so we bought fuel off from people that are on the road. They watered down the diesel. One of the things about driving, you had to drive at high speeds because the rebels would see you from a distance, and if they could see you, they would intercept you. And when we left the city, our cars, I can barely get it to go 15 miles an hour. The next place was 45 minutes away. It took me 3.5 hours to get there. The next 18 miles we would travel the next day, 3 people had been killed on that road that week alone. And I remember that I went to, and I called my director, and I said to him, I go, I don't know what to do. I said, wisdom would say, go back. I should go back and get the car repaired. And he goes, Wes, I can't tell you what to do, but every day that you delay, 9 to 12 people will die of starvation. Went to bed that night. It was a guest house. Didn't know it, but it was also the only disco in town. So guys, I laid my head down about 7 o'clock, and about 7:01, the music started. And it was right outside my window, and it was loud. And it just blared all night long. And it went off about 5 o'clock in the morning, and I fell asleep about 5:01. My alarm went off about 6, and I got up, and I was tired. I walked outside, and I had my Bible. And I sat down, and I go, Lord, I don't know what to do. Prudence would not go. I don't know if the vehicle will even make it where we got to go. And as I was praying, I was sitting on the log, and I opened my Bible, and I see this verse that says, cast your bread upon the water, for after many days you will find it again. Now, guys, when I read that verse, it literally came off the pages at me, but I did not know what it meant. Fortunately, I had a commentary, so I went down and read the commentary, and it said, be adventurous like those who accept the risk of seaborne trade. Do not always play it safe. And we would carry out operations and get there safely. Psalms 22, verse 5 says, those who trust in God will not be disappointed. Guys, if you trust in the Lord, you're not going to be disappointed in this life. In Psalms 37, it says, and I'm going to read this to you because I think it's important I read it exactly as it is. It says, do not fret because of evil men or be envious of those who do wrong. Like the grass, they will soon wither. Like the green plants, they will die away. Trust in the Lord and do good. Dwell in the land and enjoy safe pasture. Delight yourself in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. You know, I talk to young women all the time, and I find that one of the hardest things they cannot trust is trust the Lord for the right guy. Because when you trust the Lord, it's amazing. I remember my best friend many years ago went to Biola College, and I went up to the Biola College to see him. And when I got up there, he pointed, we were in the place where all the kids ate, and he pointed to a young woman, and he goes, she's the most popular girl in school. When he said it, I was shocked. Why? She wasn't unattractive, guys, but she was nowhere near what a beauty queen or what you would think would be the most popular. She was a very average girl. You know, I hate to say this, if you want to put it on a scale of 1 to 6, she was probably, or 1 to 10, she was probably a 6. But he called her over and she sat down and she started to talk about her relationship with the Lord. And in 10 minutes, she went from a 6 to a 50. I mean, she actually looked beautiful to me. And I understood her relationship with the Lord absolutely changed how I viewed her. Young girls need to trust the Lord. I met so many women that said, you know, I met this guy and he was the football star and all the girls wanted him, but he wanted me, and I gave my life to him and he said he'd love me forever until he found another woman. And then their lives feel destroyed. They feel used, and they are used. A man that truly loves a woman will wait till marriage. He will. He will value her as a great treasure. When I met Vicki, we waited. And we dated for almost 3 years because that's what the Lord had for us. Fortunately, we were so busy with work, we didn't have time to do anything else. I remember when I proposed to her, and I'll close here in about 9 minutes, guys. I flew into Africa, and I brought a ring, and we had a huge team coming. And this is what Vicki was like. She had a guy that wanted to marry her that was literally worth $150 million. Vicki wouldn't even go out on a date with him. She had another guy that was the head of a huge accounting firm, very good-looking guy, very smart, had a lot of money, wouldn't go on a date with him. People would tell me she's the last Protestant nun. I saw so many guys ask her out, and she wouldn't do it. So we have a team come in. We got vehicles loaded full of stuff, and she gets in the front. We're driving to Kampala, and she's briefing me on the things, and I reach in, and I pull the box out and I hand it to her. And she doesn't know what it is. She opens up, and she looks at it. She goes, "What is this, Wes?" I said, "Oh, it's a ring. I want you to marry me." She goes, "What?" I said, "It's a ring. I want you to marry me." She looked at, she shut that box, and she handed it back to me. She goes, "You cannot propose to me this way." She goes, "You have to take me out on a date. You have to get down on your knees. You have to ask me to marry you." We've never even gone on a date. I said, "We've eaten many times together." She goes, "It wasn't a date." So it was about 6 months before we could go out on a date. But I took her out, got down on my knees, and she said yes. And guys, it's been wonderful. For you young ladies, being married to the wrong guy can be a lifetime of misery. Being married to a man of God that you can respect is different. Being married to a woman that you can respect is different. I remember that when I married Vicki, I told her a few years afterwards, I said, "You know, honey," I go, "when I married you, you weren't actually my type. If that ever happens to you, don't say that." Okay? She said to me, "What?" She goes, "You better say that I'm better than your type." I go, "Well, you were." I said, "But truthfully, hon, you're very thin. I mean, you weigh 105 pounds. You're very elegant, kind of exotic looking." I said, "I was always used to the kind of the Coca-Cola girl, a little bit more rounded, light brown hair, blonde hair. You had black hair." I said, "What I'm saying is you are my type now." And guys, it's amazing because she is. I mean, I look at her and I'm just so totally satisfied with her. And she loves being my wife. I think that the thing that I love the most is Vicki really loves being my wife. If we're sitting with couples, she'll come sit down right next to me, put her feet up on the couch and tuck them in and lean over me. And it's such a wonderful thing. You can trust the Lord, but you have to start walking in faith. I think the hardest thing is waiting. People don't want to wait. I was 45 when I married Vicki. I was prepared to be single the rest of my life. And I was content with it, guys. I love serving Christ. I was so busy with the kingdom, I didn't think much about it, honestly. I really didn't. People would always say, "Wes will never marry." Matter of fact, I remember when I told Rob Douglas that Vicki and I were going to get married, I remember his jaw dropped. He looked at me and goes, "What?" I said, "We're going to get married." He goes, "Wait a minute." He goes, "We've never seen anything between you guys. Just like your brothers and sisters. What do you mean you're going to get married?" He goes, I go, "Well, now that I propose, you will see it, but there wasn't anything there before." And there really wasn't. I always thought Vicki was a nice girl, but I never thought about it. And then one day God spoke to me and said, "She's going to be your wife." I always tell guys will say, "Wes, how do you know which girl to marry?" I said, "There's only one question you need to ask God. Who is the woman I'm supposed to take care of the rest of my life?" And once God's answered that, you don't need to ask him any other questions. I had a guy come up to me once, and he was constantly dating and breaking up with girls. And I said to him, I go, well, what was wrong with that last girl? He goes, well, she was too pale. I said, you're an idiot. You're literally one of the stupidest men I've ever met. One, she can get a tan. But if your way that you're going to marry is by that, I'm so thankful you broke for her. I'd hate for that girl to be stuck with a miserable idiot like you, you know. And guys, I can be direct with people. I've trained my guys on staff. I remember Edward was at a church a few years ago, and Edward's on our staff there, and he runs ghost operations. And he was talking to an assistant pastor, and he said, hey, before I got married, he goes, I wasn't a Christian. I dated all these models and had great sex with them, and I married my wife, and she was good looking, and she's had a few children, and she's not so slim. And he goes, I find myself lusting for other women. He was looking for sympathy, and Edward said, you're incredibly selfish, and you should be ashamed of yourself. And the guy repented, guys. I don't play with guys. People say I'm very direct. I remember I had dinner with a pastor literally just a month ago, and when we had dinner, he goes, do you remember the first time you met me? I said, no. He goes, Wes, I had a guy in the church that was just giving me hell. And I was with Bob Davis from Idaho and a few other pastors, and you came up and you listened to me for a few minutes, and you said, are you the senior pastor? And I go, yes. I said, then just deal with him. Get rid of him. And I turned to walk off. He goes, hey, who was that guy? And they were all laughing at him. That's Wes. Guys, I don't mean to be rude, but sometimes we just need to be direct. We tell the truth. And what I'm going to tell you as a believer, those who trust in God will not be disappointed. The very act of faith, the very act of trusting will move the hand of God. But it's in his timing, not ours. God bless you guys. So.
Well, let me pray for lunch, and then I'll give you some instructions. Father, thank you so much for the incredible spiritual meal we've already had this morning. And Lord, I pray now that you would bless this physical meal to our bodies. And Lord, that we would continue to be fed spiritually as iron sharpens iron at our tables, Lord, that we would delight in you together and rejoice in you. And Lord, that you would speak to our hearts through each other, Lord, that it would be a time of just sweet fellowship, which is a fragrant aroma lifted up to your throne, Lord. We love you. We thank you for this koinonia we have together, and we pray, Lord, you'd be glorified in us. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, so instructions. We are going to head across the building into the halls like with the potluck, and Lisa's going to give you directions, but you're going to go down the right side and come around the left side. That way nobody has to go out of the building. And it's really easy because it's just sandwiches. There's turkey and ham and some kind of Italian thing and all kinds of stuff like that. So just head down, grab your stuff, and I think there's stuff to go with it. I don't know, but you'll figure it out when you get there. And then come on back here and have lunch. We're going to start the next session at 1 o'clock, and don't be late, because I told Daniel Messiah, if anybody can keep people awake after lunch, it's you. And so you don't want to be late for the 1 o'clock session. And after that, in the afternoon, we're going to do a panel up here, and we'll get some testimonies and talk about how these guys got called to the ministry and what it looked like. And then if we have some time, we'll do some Q&A time as well. All right, so go ahead and head on out, and let's get some food, and then we'll come back and fellowship.